Good morning. Good morning. Welcome, everybody. I am Vince Henkes. I'm a partner at Thrive Capital, and we are so excited to have you all here today to learn about GPT-4 and a bunch of the products that OpenAI is working on. This is a really special event, and we are accompanied by a set of remarkable people in the room here today. It's really great to see everybody in person. I know many of you. And we have hundreds on live stream. What's great about this is everyone is a part of the Thrive community in some special way. And so we want to thank you all for taking the time out of your busy weeks to join us for this event. I also want to thank the OpenAI team for welcoming us in their beautiful office and all of the prep work that went into this event. Corey and Ted and Rohan and Glory and Brad and other people that I'm missing the names of. There's a lot of effort that goes on to putting these kinds of materials together and program for you all. So thank you so much for having us and welcoming us all here today. The goal of this event is really to bring you closer to the epicenter of what's happening in this fast-changing market. The technology is evolving so fast, and we find it harder to just keep up with what's going on. And so everybody is talking about AI, probably too much. And certainly, ChatGPT and GPT-4 have captured the world's attention. And so many of you that I know, or companies and founders that we work with, have been asking, how should you think about it? How should you infuse this product into your products that you're building? What new business opportunities can you guys go after? And on the flip side, how are your competitors going to use this product? Or what new competitors will get started that might disrupt your products? And so you all will have to answer those questions for your own company. But the goal of today is to serve as hopefully a really valuable resource for you all to know what is possible with the technology, how to get started building, and hopefully to meet some friends and get in touch with OpenAI as a company to move faster as you as builders kind of work on products that ultimately come to market. And so with that, I'm going to welcome Brad Lightcap up to the stage. He is the COO of OpenAI. He has been with the company almost since the beginning, so he's got a rich sense of the history of where things have come from. I think he's got a special announcement for today, but most importantly, he's going to talk about a little bit of the future of the products and how they are looking to support you all as builders in their ecosystem. So let's give him a warm welcome.
Great. Is this on? Working? No. Yeah. Awesome. Great. So thank you, Vince, and also to the whole Thrive team for putting this together, and welcome to OpenAI. As Vince said, I'm the COO here at OpenAI, so I work really closely with our entire commercial operation, our product teams, engineering teams, obviously work super closely with our research teams as well. And I want to spend a little bit of time today basically giving you a look kind of into how we think about our opportunity to work with you all. And then also kind of giving you like a little bit of a perspective on like how to think about OpenAI, and then also how to think about kind of our technology. I think like, as Vince mentioned, this stuff is like so opaque. And even to us, I think we're also struggling a little bit with kind of how do you think about what the world looks like in 2, 5, 10 years? And I think the answer is we don't know. But working with you all and working with companies that are building with us, I think that future starts to become a little bit clearer. And so I just want to share with you kind of how we think about that at the highest level. And then I'll also take some questions at the end, and you can ask me what you think or grill me on whether you think our vision of the future matches yours. First, real quick, a couple things. So I just want to thank a few people. Like, y'all realize how much work goes into these things or don't realize, but from the OpenAI side, Glory, Abram, Dante, Reggie, Jamel, the whole security staff here, Corey, managing events. Like these things are always complex, and they work really, really hard to make these things great. I hope the live stream doesn't go down, but we'll keep our fingers crossed. And then on the Thrive side, so Catherine, Sarah, and Sasha, all here have done an amazing amount of work. And then also thank you to Josh, to Vince, and the entire Thrive team. We feel very lucky to have them in our world and call them friends, as I'm sure you all do too. Cool. So real quick, so how do you think about OpenAI? So like, let's back up a little bit and kind of look at the history of the company. So we started back in late 2015 as a nonprofit, which is an unusual place to start for any startup. The idea there was that we were going to go build artificial general intelligence, and that process would require a focus on safety and on the outcomes that we thought needed to be have a certain kind of ethos and a certain set of values and a certain set of a certain buy-in from the world that was a best fit for a nonprofit. We quickly realized that it was really actually hard to actualize that mission in the form of a nonprofit. So we restructured in 2017, technically, 2018, and we basically we formed a nonprofit entity, for-profit entity, but our nonprofit's actually still really at the core of how we operate. And our mission hasn't changed. So our mission is to build artificial general intelligence that's safe and broadly beneficial. And I want to come back to those two terms, safe and broadly beneficial, because I actually think that the phase of this journey that we're in, those two things are actually starting to become very real as concepts that are kind of adjacent to the core technical part of our mission. So one is, what is safety? So these systems are increasingly becoming powerful. They are increasingly becoming autonomous. And we expect that trend to continue over time. And then two is, what are these systems going to do in the world, and what is their place, and how do they create value for people? And that seems kind of like a simple question at a high level, but you kind of think about it like deep down, and you realize actually it requires like a very big shift in how you think about building software, and how you think about building products, and what the engagement model is between users and those products. And we'll talk a little bit about that as well. And I think what's really special is to have everyone here thinking about that in kind of a discrete sense, specific to your product and specific to your users. And I'll kind of underscore that like we are all on this journey together. I think people model OpenAI somewhat as this like cabal of people that sit in the mission and kind of know what's coming. And we don't have much of a better sense than anyone does. But I think kind of the ethos of the company and why it's called OpenAI is that we want this process to be participatory, and we want the path to AGI to very much be a joint effort. And that starts with things like this. And so zooming out, kind of tying this event to the history of OpenAI, these things actually really have somewhat sentimental meaning for us because it starts to feel like the beginning of the actualization of the mission. How do you create broad benefit? How do you think about safety as you deploy these systems? And we specifically are a research and deployment company. And the deployment side of our work doesn't necessarily happen just through us. That happens through everyone in this room. So I'm happy to come back and answer questions about us, our structure. We are happy to share more. Anything that's top of mind for you all can come back to that. Second thing, so how do you think about the future? So also zooming back out, and I like to zoom out and try and contextualize things in the arc of history here. So I would say, despite the like fervor and the frenzy, and everyone here probably has board members that are kind of like breathing down your neck, like saying, what is our AI strategy? When are we going to launch something built on GPT, whatever? Like, first of all, everyone take a breath and realize like where we are in what I think is going to be a very, a much longer dated process. Like I always kind of say that like, where I feel intuitively like we are right now is kind of like 1993 vis-a-vis the internet. And I think if you kind of zoom out in like the broad, scope of time, like the things that were happening in 1993 probably felt really, really important, but like we just don't really talk about some of the things that happened then now. Like it changed so much, and as companies kind of like started to understand the technical trend line, started to build products, engagement models with users started to emerge and become normal. We learned a lot, and the participation patterns of people in that wave started to become defined on like a 20+ year timeline. I don't know if it's going to be 20+ years here. I actually think there's reason to think that might truncate and accelerate. But I still want to just emphasize how early we are in this. And so consider that as you kind of start to work with us, as you start to work with your users and on your products, is that there's a lot still to learn here. I think like 99% of the things that we need to know about how this works are ahead of us, not behind us. And so I think that sense of history is really important. And also just in realizing your engagement with OpenAI or with anyone providing kind of foundational models, the more you can pass back to us in terms of how you learn, the more valuable it is for us to kind of create products and services and models that are safe, that are aligned, and that do the things that your users kind of ask them to do. I also want to talk a little bit about kind of how to think about software in the context of this. And so maybe a little more kind of forward-looking here. But it does feel to me kind of like it's a foregone conclusion that like the way that software gets built is going to change pretty substantially. Like I said, I think we're still learning what that looks like. But at the highest level, kind of the way I think about it is we're going from a world of building these like really static systems to with like really static data and these fairly rigid engagement models and interaction models to worlds with really dynamic systems where data is more dynamic, the engagement model is more dynamic, the underlying engines that power these applications and experiences are fundamentally like probabilistic, but they're really, really powerful. And so what does it mean to build software here, right? Software kind of, I think historically has just been this tool. It's been this kind of fairly binary experience of like, okay, I have to navigate this piece of software. I have to kind of click into like a thing. You have to kind of try and distill user intent into a piece of software or shape user intent in a piece of software that is fundamentally a like code to human experience. I think that paradigm is going to start to change. And so one of the things that I think you'll see today, and some of the ways that you should think about the things we show you all, is how do I think about instantiating these things into the process of building software, into the process of building amazing experiences for users, and in the engagement that users have with your products. I think that the way that we kind of look at it is like, you know, software being this tool, and that's going to evolve basically into software being really this thing that's actually quite assistive. You kind of have like inklings of that today. I think if you know the word copilot has kind of entered the lexicon here. I think that's actually a fairly fitting word for how we think about the model of where kind of AI is today vis-a-vis the types of experiences that are possible, is to basically build this thing that's now assistive to a user. It sits side by side, and it can help them do things faster, better. It can bring more richness to a workflow or to a process or to an experience. You can offload a lot of the drudgery, and you can give users an opportunity to recoup some of the time, and in some cases some of their sanity, when it comes to engaging with a certain workflow through a piece of software. Over time, we think that opportunity is going to shift a little bit to actually being more of a user-agent relationship, and that's the thing that we should all kind of think more about is as these systems kind of start to build more autonomy, as they become more capable, as they become more like have more world context and ability to navigate the world, what does it mean to actually build software in that world, right? What's the engagement model between a user and a piece of software where software can go out and actually take action, can actually go sit and reason and think about something and come back with an answer? And that answer should be right, and I think will increasingly be right, but at first it probably won't always be right. And so these are the types of challenges I think that we want to explore with you all. You all are on the front lines of building and deploying these tools. We really are ultimately a partner to you all in that journey. And that brings me to the last thing I want to talk about, which is how to model OpenAI. And it's basically exactly that. So at our core, we really think about the things we build as platforms. It sounds cliche, everyone uses the term platform, but fundamentally, like we as OpenAI are not going to go out into the world and build in any domain. We're not going to go build an AI doctor. We're not going to go build an AI lawyer. We're not going to go build an AI teacher. We're not going to go build an AI salesperson. We're not going to go do those things. We want to basically build a foundation on which really, really thoughtful founders, really, really thoughtful companies can go craft those experiences in ways that are specific to the pain points of their users, that are thoughtful with respect to the engagement models that are required for these types of products, that are thoughtful even with respect to the other stakeholders in that ecosystem. So regulators, policymakers, users, internationally, in the US, those are all things that you all understand better than we ever will. And so that's kind of how we fashion ourselves is we want to build the best tools. We want to build the most aligned and the safest models, but also the most powerful models for you all to bring to your users in the format that makes the most sense. And again, we see this as two-way. So for us, we learn like an incredible amount from engaging with you all in a really, really kind of tight feedback loop. And the more you can engage with us, the better we can make our models, the safer we can make our models, the more robust we can make our models to the things that they're probably not working super well at today. And it's just, I want to underscore how important that is to us to have that feedback loop. You will never see us turn you away if you want to come to us with feedback. And if you ever do, please email me directly. I'm brad@openai.com. And I think that was basically all I had. Oh, I did have one other thing. Vince put me on the spot to drop some news here. So one question you all may have is about ChatGPT, which many people now think is the name of the company. The number of people that congratulate me on all my success working at ChatGPT, if I had $1, could pay for the computer that runs it. But yeah, so how do you think about ChatGPT? So we're going to announce something kind of cool today that I think actually really defines the opportunity around ChatGPT. It should be out in roughly 45 minutes, might slip, we'll see. But you're going to hear about something called plugins. And plugins is something that we built that allows ChatGPT, which is actually this fairly limited system. Its knowledge cuts off at 2021, I think it is. It's kind of an input-output system that can kind of give you funny answers to things or maybe useful answers to coding questions or things about the world, but it's actually not, it's kind of contained in this box. Plugins is an opportunity for developers to come in and build on top of that experience. And so you now kind of extend ChatGPT's ability to go out into the world and call other APIs, tap into other knowledge stores, tap into other products to actually bring an experience that is native to your products, to your users, to your experiences into ChatGPT and vice versa. And so you'll hear more about that today. I think we're going to demo that for you. I think Rohan is going to demo that for you. I think this is one of the most exciting things that we've ever released. Again, kind of thinking in the mentality of platforms. How do we create the broadest surface area and the most opportunity for you all to build experiences that are great for your users? That's the thing I think that kind of lifts this all up and makes it really, really powerful. And we take that same mentality to ChatGPT as we do to our core platform. So anyway, that'll be really fun. We're really looking forward to sharing it with you. We, I think, have a very packed day here of not only that, but GPT-4 and I'm sure Dolly and some of our audio models as well. So again, really excited. Thank you all for being here. It means the world to us that y'all would come out. Hello to everyone on the live stream also. Thank you. And happy to take a few questions if there are any. I think we got a few minutes.
How do you personally use the technology in your day-to-day? Do you find yourself hitting up the robot?
Yeah, so the question was, how do I use the technology in my day-to-day? So I probably have a unique use case relative to the rest of OpenAI. I think OpenAI broadly, I would say that the thing that's probably the most popular use case for us is just the coding ability of the models and being both a kind of pair programmer and also this kind of coding assistant that sits with you and probably saves you the pain of navigating Stack Overflow. I'm not coding all day. Mostly what I'm doing is trying to kind of synthesize information, the like barrage of information that I handle in any given day, and kind of better understand what that information contains, better understand the things that are most important in that information, and then also kind of thinking about how do I extend that information to be able to share it with other people who may or may not be as close to the concept or the topics that are at hand. And so I run finance here, for example, and one of the crazy things that I've done with GPT-4, for example, is I took an entire financial model in Excel. I literally copied and pasted like from an Excel sheet, not an export to CSV, just a straight copy paste, value paste, into GPT-4 and asked it to write me a brief on what it was seeing in the model, and then also to recommend 2 or 3 things that could improve business performance based on just the revenue model that I dropped in. That was an experimental thing. I wouldn't recommend that being like your hard and fast use case here, but it's amazing the ability that these models have to distill really, really complex information into something that's actually really, really simplified and very clear. And that's where we saw the biggest jump with GPT-4 from the earlier models is not only the expanded context length, but also just their ability to grasp like a ton of information and distill what's important. And as someone who has to navigate that model and would otherwise take 20, 30 minutes to have to go through and think through every variable in that model, it actually was pretty good at being able to say, okay, here are the 5 things that really, really matter, and here are the things that you should convey to your board or or the CEO of the company if you wanted to actually present kind of a summary of our results. And so that's kind of cool. Not an everyday use case, but that worked the other day. But every day I sit with ChatGPT open, as some of you probably all do, and I basically at this point now, it's just anything that pops into my head that I kind of want to know, see, summarize, et cetera, it gets dropped in there. So.
Should I wait for a mic?
No, I can repeat.
Okay. So you mentioned, like in the near or perhaps less near future, OpenAI transitioning to more agent-based models. How is OpenAI like thinking about using doing that transition so that these probabilistic models can become more dependable for making business decisions?
Yeah, it's a great question. So the question was, as we shift toward more powerful models that have more agency in the world, how do you think about the capabilities of the models from, from like a truthfulness perspective, and then also from just given their probabilistic nature as it relates to being critical in business processes? Yeah, so this is kind of part of the learning process actually that I was talking about. Is when we train these models, we don't really know immediately kind of what the edges of their performance are. And there's a stark difference between the kind of academic eval set that we test them on and the real world use case. And I think that was actually the biggest update for us over the last 2 years is like the academic evals are great and they look good in the paper and whatever, but like if these models can't survive contact with reality in a business or for a user, they're ultimately just worthless, even if they score well on the academic evals. And so a couple things. So one is there's some technical things that we can go solve and will solve over the next, call it year, that we know are kind of critical deficiencies of the models. Things like hallucinations, things like limitations on their world understanding, right? The training cuts off at a certain date. We're actually engineering and working around all those things. Plugins is an example of something that actually gives the model some level of extensibility. Retrieval is another thing that we'll talk a lot more about in the coming year, and being able to open source a lot of the retrieval work that we do, so that the model's innate kind of understanding of the world is not limited to whatever the cutoff of the data of the training is. Things like fine-tuning, giving developers more tools to actually bring kind of new knowledge into the models, have them understand more context, more style, and expanding the context length, more tools in prompt engineering, and just being able to generally give people more tools to try and control these things. You'll never not make them probabilistic, but I think you can get them to a point where you feel really, really confident in their ability to deliver at any given task. And then also just requires a little bit to what I was talking about is like a little bit of a change in mentality around how you engineer with these systems. I think that's the thing that's actually really interesting for us from a product perspective is as you go to use these systems, what are the things that you've discovered that work really, really well from a product design and engineering perspective that give you guys confidence in deploying them in production. And so, so those are the types of things that we think about. Yeah.
Yeah, so you mentioned hallucinations a little bit. Going back to kind of the OpenAI model, you talk a lot about being a partner for developers, but there's also a whole nefarious world around it being used in the real world, whether it be phishing or cybersecurity. How do you think of yourself as a partner there in your model and kind of controlling kind of what the negative effects might be for your partners that are using it?
Yeah. So I'll repeat the question. So the question was basically how do we control the models with respect to people who would have, nefarious intent with respect to cybersecurity and other things where these models definitely have capabilities that could enhance the abilities of any bad actor that wants to use them. So I think a couple things. So one is at the global level, which is just understanding who we're working with and making sure that that's really robust. I think like getting the kind of KYC right here is something that we're working on, and we go to great lengths. And I know it creates pain at points, and we've tried to do away with a lot of that as best we can while retaining our ability to understand who's on the other side of these systems. One is we place a lot of emphasis on who we work with, and I think like in terms of kind of how we elevate the companies that we're working with in the most positive ways. I think that's kind of like the big thing that we want to kind of focus on over the next year is like making sure that for every opportunity that a hacker would have to use these systems, that we're working with 10 or 15 other companies that are actually basically building like the kind of counter agent to that. And we do work with a lot of companies right now that are basically kind of building the defenses against those would-be nefarious use cases. The other is at the local level, so the engineering level, the model, and the training level, and trying to make the systems robust. I think we'll never be able to control 100% for people that want to use these models for bad things, but how do you make the models themselves resilient, robust to people who have an intent to misuse them? That's an ongoing research challenge. I think we spend a lot of cycles thinking about those things, from the research side all the way on through to the production side for us. Alignment is super, super critical, and being able to give the models some kind of innate sense of like when they're being misused or when a user kind of has intent that is not necessarily in line with the principles that we espouse for how they should be used is something we think a lot about. We want to be careful here. Obviously, we don't want to go so far as to constrain the model's abilities or impair its ability to be dependable in good workflows. But yeah, it's probably what I spend the most time on, kind of in a research context as we think about product is how do we make sure that they're resilient to misuse.
We have a question from the live stream. Is OpenAI also planning to release a way to measure or fact check the model outputs more on the lines of explainability?
Yeah, so this is an interesting question. I think we take a little bit of a different, I think, approach to this generally. So there's the concept of kind of truthfulness of the models. I think there is a kind of black and white way to try and go do that. I think that we will continue to push on a lot of work there, and just making sure that, I guess, going back to the question around hallucinations, pushing from an engineering perspective on trying to limit where we know there's gaps in the abilities that the models have to produce truthful answers. But there's another thing which is actually kind of a broader research thing, which is evals. And so for a lot of areas, there's squishiness to the answer, and it's not always so black and white, right? And the models actually do have this innate knowledge. Here's kind of the funny thing is when you prompt the model and it gives you a wrong answer, if you respond to it and say, come on, you know the right answer, you know that answer is wrong, give me the right answer, it will apologize to you and more often than not give you the right answer. And so part of it is solving for the innate things that the model has gaps in, which is for example, mathematical reasoning. It's still going to be limited in its ability to reason mathematically. You can try and basically kind of research and train in its ability to improve in mathematics. But if you're asking it more subjective questions, there evals actually really matter. And a field, for example, that this is really important in is legal. And so legal, obviously is a field that's basically built on opinions. It's effectively interpretation of laws. That's basically the job of a human being, is to sit and interpret the law in favor of a client and the position they want to take, right? And so how do you actually build systems that can give a legal opinion but kind of have the perspective globally that this is an opinion and that there might be two sides to this equation? We spend a lot of time on that, and the way that we do it is with evals. We're actually open sourcing our eval work, and we're going to have what's called eval lib, an eval library that people can contribute to that basically just lets us test the capabilities of the model against this kind of real-world eval set, and to try and develop a better sense for us of the model's capability, not in the sense of factualness and the binary kind of concept of truth, but in the concept of capability. Is the model good at making those types of subjective judgments? Does it have a grasp on these concepts in a way that's rich enough that would match the kind of human level of subjectivity on these things? And can it kind of reason through both sides of a position, both sides of an argument? And so you'll hear more about that in the coming weeks also.
At time,
We're
but
done?
thank you so much, Brad. That was a great presentation.
Thank you all.
Next up, we have Nick, who is the product manager behind ChatGPT.
Hi. Should I, Gloria, should I connect? Sorry. Cool. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. And I'm super excited to share a little bit more about product at OpenAI today. As mentioned, I work on ChatGPT. We have about 4 product people here. We're relatively new to building products at all, as Brad mentioned. We started as actually a research company. And there's a ton of different ways to talk about our research and visualize it. The most accessible way that I've found is this graph. We have a ton of people who are just focused on creating actually the most intelligent and safe models. And the reason I really like this graph is because it's researchers tend to look at academic evals, but I think test performance is a really cool one. And as you can see, this is the GPT-4 graph. You can see how that's just gotten so much better over the last couple weeks. The bar one is my favorite one. But the thing that I'm really excited about, and the reason that I'm at OpenAI, is the products that we build. I joined about 8 months ago, and fundamentally, our product strategy is basically 2 things. First, we're working on ChatGPT, and we're very serious about that. It didn't actually start that way. When we first launched ChatGPT, it was about a 10-day project to get a small little research demo out and get some feedback. And I still remember the day. I think 48 hours in, or I think it was 24 hours in, we were like, why do we have so much usage in Japan? At the time, we hadn't done any press or hadn't done anything. And it turns out we somehow went viral in Japan Reddit, and the thing kind of took its course from then. But so ChatGPT is here to stay, and it's been funny getting there. The platform is the much more mature product offering that we have in our portfolio. And the way that we sort of think about ChatGPT and the platform is that everything we build in ChatGPT is fundamentally built on the same platform that we expose externally. So very similar to sort of Amazon and AWS. We have this thing that lets anyone build great large language model apps, and we have ChatGPT, which is sort of a killer app run on the platform. And we kind of use ChatGPT to demonstrate what's possible with the technology. Obviously, both of these are incredibly deep and substantial product areas. I spend a lot of my time on the first one. But increasingly, we're blurring the lines because you'll see the plugins launch later today. That's actually why I'm partially distracted. It's going to be a really cool way of actually opening up ChatGPT itself to developers too. Talk a little bit more about ChatGPT. We have 2 versions of that today. We have the forever free version. It's always going to be free, no plan, go paid only or anything like that. It's free, it's got a really easy UX, and we were reflecting on why ChatGPT was so successful, and we think it was probably some combination of the model being very good and actually doing what people wanted, but also just the UX, and there not being a wait list and just being very accessible to people around the world, and we plan to keep it that way. We've also introduced a Plus offering. The reason we have that is so that we can offer the best version of what ChatGPT could be to people. This is how we've deployed, GPT-4 for anyone to try. It was really important to us, that we don't launch, here's GPT-4, but no one can actually try it, or here's a wait list coming soon. We wanted to have it on day 1, and that's why we have Plus, so that, more expensive to run models are equally accessible to as many people as possible. That's ChatGPT. The other part of our product portfolio is the platform, and as mentioned a little bit earlier, it's really, really important to us. The sole reason that ChatGPT exists is really to improve our platform, because we found, hey, if we build on the same platform, we're actually going to learn, where the issues are. We're going to be a customer to ourselves and just iterate so much faster than we otherwise could. And what we're trying to do with the platform is just make all the building blocks that you need to make a great large language model application available to you as a developer. And we're kind of increasingly covering ground. We started with just text with the original GPT-3 model. Now we have GPT-4 as well. We have embeddings, which let you run search or store information in an efficient way and actually connect them to your to your text-based applications. We have image. DALL-E feels like ages ago at this point, but that was just last summer. And we have voice, which is kind of one of my favorite things in the platform portfolio, just because it's just so good. You can transcribe anything with accuracy, whether or not someone has an accent or not, and it's so cheap. So we're increasingly, really expanding the modalities that we, offer best-in-class models for. One of the demos I actually want to do is, showing what we're doing on visual, which is a part of GPT-4 that we haven't generally released yet, but are actively working to release, and is just really, really cool. But our strategy here is, in all of these categories, just have the best thing, possible for you to build on, and continue to, make the best models available. And some of these will integrate into ChatGPT, but the thing I want to emphasize is, we have this like two-pronged vision where we keep making ChatGPT better and we keep making the platform better. I'd love to do a little demo of something that I think is really cool. I was going to demo plugins, but there's going to be a demo of that later. So I'm going to demo the visual capabilities of GPT-4 today. I'm going to do that, show some really cool examples, and then I'd love to just take questions. It could be about products at OpenAI, it can be about ChatGPT, which is the thing I work on, or just anything that's on your mind. So stay tuned for that. So I'm going to pull up this little internal playground. Please ignore the fact that it says lit chat. You can tell, very internal for now. So, and actually before, I show this, GPT-4 is just generally really, really smart at a bunch of use cases. But one of the big things that's new about it is that it can consume visual input. So it can actually reason about images. And this is just one story on a long path to ultimately build a model that can see what we see and do what we do. And it's just increasingly generally intelligent. But it's a really important milestone. And it's actually hard without seeing the examples to really sort of wrap your head around why visual might be really, really cool. One of the things I've learned as a product person is that you don't really understand the applications until the technology exists. I was very used to starting with a user problem, being like, okay, what are all the ways to solve it, and then picking one. But here it's really, you kind of have to see this stuff, and then you start to imagine what the products are that could be built. So what I would love for you all to do is to do that and start thinking about what would be possible once GPT-4 can actually take visual input, because I think there's just going to be so many cool applications. So I'm going to start with a relatively boring but very cool example. I'm going to take a receipt. It's just a boring old receipt. And I'm going to ask it, GPT-4, can you turn the image of this receipt into JSON? Here it goes. You can imagine, that might have some really cool business applications. Fundamentally, OCRs existed for a while, so maybe that's cool, but all right. Next thing I want to show hold on. Is, okay, can it actually reason about visual input? Because one of the things that's just insane about GPT-4 is that it's just so good at sort of cognitive reasoning, not just retrieving information, but actually hard stuff. So I'm going to show it this image and ask it what happens when I cut the scissors. Oh, little demo error. That's how you know it's a real. Let me try again. Now I have another playground. Here we go. If you cut the string holding the scissors with another pair of scissors, the ball hanging from the string will fall due to gravity. Depending on the position of the other objects in relation to the falling ball, the ball may knock over or come into contact with other objects when it falls, such as the bell and the seesaw-like structure. From the illustration alone, it's unclear how the other objects might be affected by the event. Okay, that's okay. I've seen better performances on this. But you can see, it's able to actually connect its text reasoning abilities with sort of what's in the image, which is really, really cool. Let's try another one. This one. Is a meme. So I don't actually fully get why it's funny, but maybe GPTV can help me. I think this is going to be the killer app for anyone not in the meme generation. Why? This image is funny because it plays with our expectations. The text suggests a very serious sentiment about admiring the beauty of the Earth from space, which usually invokes images of our planet's vast landscape in serene colors. However, the image presented is actually humorous, creative representation of the continents using pieces of fried chicken on a baking tray. The juxtaposition of the serious text and the comical visual depiction of Earth creates an element of surprise, making the image amusing. So it can't just reason about like physics and what's going to happen in the image. It can actually also explain why stuff is funny, which to me is really, really mind-boggling, because I think that's really, really hard for humans sometimes. I'll show a couple more. You may be like, okay, this is cool, but is it going to be useful? And that kind of describes me most of the time when working here, because I work in product, but I don't really, make the technology. I just try to find cool stuff that should be products and try to turn them into products. And so that question is always on my mind. The next one I want to show is just an image of like some mechanical stuff. This is the type of thing I'd probably have to call my dad about. Like, what is that thing up there? Clearly needs to be repaired or something. What is that thing? Let's see if this works. Based on the image provided, the object that you pointed to with the red arrow and labeled this appears to be a sanitary T-fitting, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I don't know if anyone in the audience can confirm if this is true. And this points out a core, I think, philosophical problem once the models get very powerful. It's like, how do you even verify that they're correct when the problem is very hard? But this one should be verifiable, just not by me. Last one, and then I'd love to do some Q&A about anything. This is my favorite. Imagine, your fridge is empty, or barely empty, and you're like, what could I possibly make, with what's in there? Let's go with, here's my fridge. What should I make? It's suggesting cheesy garlic eggs. It's giving me a full-on recipe. If you stay tuned for the plugins launch, you'll see how ChatGPT can get you the ingredients delivered as well. Small tease. All right, that's it on my visual demos. As mentioned, we're working on bringing all this technology to you so you can go build on it. this is something we felt really excited to announce. We're working on making it available. Start thinking about what you might want to build is my suggestion. Cool. Would love to take any questions. Should I just call on people, or how are we doing it? Cool.
Are you giving any thought to how you might make answers verifiable without having an expert to look at them? So more transparency so that people can actually validate the
To
information.
users?
Yeah, to users.
Yeah. I've been thinking about this a lot. When you talk to ChatGPT users actually around the world, factuality, and actually it's not just factuality, but I want to be able to trust this thing or be calibrated on how I can trust this thing is one of the top user pain points just around the world. And my guess is that that's true for any sort of general LLM app too. One of the things, there's a couple different things we've been exploring, and they're all pretty exploratory still because it's a hard research problem and a hard product problem in many ways. One of the things I've been excited about is have the model actually critique itself and sort of offer some sort of credence to its claims. Because it actually, when asked, can actually make statements, especially GPT-4, on how sure it is about something. That's still going to be fundamentally flawed, but I think it's interesting. The other thing we've been exploring is connecting large language models to external tools like a browser. And you actually see that as part of the plugins launch. As much as possible, if we can convert the way we use large language models from being a fact retrieval machine, which is always going to be flawed and have hallucinations, to a thing that figures out what sources to use instead. I think the more we can offer both more factuality and more confidence to users. The third thing I've been exploring is a little bit of sort of having a product layer that can assess what the model says sort of in parallel, and just highlight things that may be hallucinations or add sources where where applicable. You could imagine actually searching through a knowledge base in parallel to tag stuff. So we're exploring all of this. We're testing some of it with users, but the thing I want to highlight is that this is very much an unsolved problem. And while we haven't solved that problem, it's really important to frame products appropriately. One of the big things when we launched ChatGPT was we actually framed it, very, very cautiously. We didn't even call it a product at the time because we felt, hey, there's going to be so much work to do to really let people rely on this and make it auditable. What we saw is that that is absolutely true, but there are some use cases where it's close enough, especially creative writing, help with programming, and a bunch of these things where users are appropriately calibrated. But there's a lot more work to do on this topic, and we're excited to keep exploring it. Back? Sorry, yeah, I'll take your, yeah, you go.
I'm curious how you would think about what step changes you might anticipate in the functionality of ChatGPT. And by that, I mean, I'd imagine there's a set of things that you would get by just training with a larger parameter space or just sort of continuing down that loss curve. But what are some of the things like image input that you would expect would be step changes in what ChatGPT can do?
To me, there's kind of there's three dimensions where we're sort of, I think, we can really push on, and it's going to transform what the product or what products like this do. Again, I want to emphasize, we'll do this stuff in ChatGPT, but we'll make it available to anyone so that hopefully there's many, many clones of ChatGPT all over that do specific and dedicated things. The first image is sort of letting it see what we can see as humans, and visual input is one of them. But you can imagine also showing what we have seen. If you could give it context, on your day or on what you did last week, or on your documents, or on just your memories of any sort. The thing will transform sort of from a assistant that's it's always its first day because it doesn't really know anything about you. To an actual assistant that gets to know you over time, et cetera. So more inputs, I think, is definitely one dimension, and visual is the beginning of that story. The inverse of that is sort of more outputs. Right now, these products, they typically return text. but I'm excited to kind of expand the action space of these products substantially. And the way we do that, and I was hinting at this, with the other question, is by really leveraging the cognitive abilities of the model to actually do things rather than just retrieve facts. So you can imagine it sending an email, or you could just imagine it, producing a file, or just doing more useful things. And I think that is going to be as transformative as the model's getting better. And so many people are already building stuff like this now, where it's a little bit more agent-like, a little bit less like an answering machine. The third thing is personalization, where I think, ideally this stuff gets better the more you use it. Not true for these apps. It's true for traditional ML apps in many ways, but it's not true for most large language apps. So I think cracking that is just going to have compounding effects and feel like a step change. So I think these are all kind of product-y things on top of just the models getting better that I'm excited about, that I think are going to make this feel a lot more like general intelligence and a little bit less like a better way to answer knowledge retrieval questions. Yeah.
Yeah, I actually really enjoyed your boring example.
Sorry.
I actually really enjoyed your boring example of reading the receipt. I'm curious, how are things performing in terms of optical character recognition, in terms of what we've seen traditionally? I mean, is there a step change in the ability to be able to read text from images? That's really exciting.
It's a good question. I believe it beats a lot of the standard OCR benchmarks, but I don't have it on the top of my head. Where I know it does really well is with you kind of don't know what it is, really unstructured things. But if the question is, will it be better at receipt recognition than a standard state-of-the-art OCR library? I actually don't know. We'll have to get back to you on it.
So your COO said something along the lines to the sentiment of, we like to work with the field, basically, to bring all of this forward. I'm curious, how do you work with other companies to bring forward products or ideas outside of course, the extreme case of Microsoft, or the other end of just people paying for API access?
Yeah. So we love working with startups. To us, that's the most fun customer segment to work with because they move really fast. We also have some enterprise customers who we're really excited about, who we have long-running relationships with, many of which we've announced. You could call, for example, what we did with Notion, an enterprise customer. But I think the thing where we're really trying to continue to build muscle is working with earlier stage startups who are building real in production apps. We have a bunch of different feedback channels for that. We also are really hungry for evaluations, so basically failure modes of the model, because we're committed to just eradicating those as fast as we possibly can, which is why we did the eval-lib stuff. Depending on the direction of the question, we have a bunch of startup-specific programs, I think, that are the thing that we're currently trying to scale. We have enterprise partnerships, which is a standard contact sales team type thing. And then we have the long tail self-serve API, which hundreds of thousands of developers just use to mostly tinker. So kind of different customer segments in that business.
So much, Nick.
All right. Thanks for having me.
And now we're going to take a 10-minute break. Please be back by 10:20. Thank you.
It's super early for like ideation phase, but I think like it's happening.
All right. Hi, everyone. Please take your seats. We're going to go through our next set of demos. Awesome. So thank you all for coming here. We're really excited and thrilled to have you. Next up, we're going to go over the capabilities of the OpenAI platform from the engineers of the GTM team. I'm Glory, and I'll be talking about embeddings and a little bit about prompt engineering. Simone will go over the differences between 3.5 and 4, and Rohan will go over some cool new features. So I like to think of embeddings as a wonderful tool in the OpenAI toolkit, and they have many use cases. So what are embeddings? Embeddings are a way to represent a string of text into a numerical output or a vector. Our model takes in a string input and outputs it into a vector of floating numbers. We can then use those vectors to compute semantic similarity. So how do we use this? We can use embeddings in search. Say you have like a large corpus of text. If you embed those documents in the corpus, and then you take a query input string, you can recommend that top 3 recommended documents that are from the corpus with that query string. Another use case is clustering. You can use the vectors derived from the embedding model and use a clustering algorithm of your choice, such as k-means, to help group texts. You can also do anomaly detection by picking out an abnormal cluster, such as the green one shown here. And with all these cases, they're available in the GitHub cookbook under OpenAI. So now that we see the use cases, let's think about how we can integrate this. Cool. So I'm pulling up an example from the OpenAI cookbook, and this is available right now in the apps. So here's a file Q&A. I have uploaded 3 files here. So there's the Thrive Capital Wikipedia page, the GPT-4 blog post, and the product page for GPT-4. So I'm gonna ask the question, what is the mission of Thrive Capital? And so we have 3 different pages. Let's see what happens. All right, so the mission of Thrive Capital is to invest in technology platforms such as Instagram, GitHub, Spotify, and Twitch. And it said it found this answer in the file Thrive Capital Wikipedia. In the second file extract, it states that Thrive Capital is known for being an early investor. And we can see that here. So let's think about what's happening behind the scenes. There are embeddings of these documents. So we just took the entire document, embedded it, and then we used GPT-3, and now you can use GPT-4 to ask questions based on that content and really narrow down your context window and focus. I'm going to ask a question about who are the companies who use GPT-4. And it's able to answer that as well. Be My Eyes, Stripe, Morgan Stanley, Khan Academy, Government of Iceland. And we can see that in the product page as well. And depending on how granular you want your text embeddings to be, you can customize your context window to that. Next up, I'm going to go a little bit over prompt engineering. So, okay. Showed some early things. Cool. First, I'm going to judge whether the question can be answered on the text below. So here's a text that I have with the OpenAI charter. And I'm going to ask the model to think step by step. So first, judge whether the question can be answered based on the text below, then answer questions based on the text below if possible. And if the question can't be used on the article, say, I don't know. So we have a question, we have it can be answered or not, and the answer. So this question answer format is already set up for us. All right. So
I'm just going to quickly do a question. What is the mission of OpenAI? And can it be answered yes or no? I'm going to just copy that over. And I'm also going to show probabilities to the full spectrum. And I'm going to set the temperature to 0. And what this does is it decreases the randomness of the output. And this shows the probability of the next token. Also, it's taking a little bit of a second to load, so. All right, these things happen here. So we see yes, 89.45%. The mission of OpenAI is to ensure that artificial general intelligence, AI systems that are generally smarter than humans, benefits all of humanity. Does anyone in the room have a question we'd like to ask? All right.
What was the first language model that GPT released?
What is the first?
Yeah, language model that GPT, or that OpenAI released. Oh, now I'm
First, because it's not written there in the charter, it can't find the answer, and it says, sorry, I don't know. And we also included that as well. Because the model wants to give you an answer, you can also say if the question can't be based, say, sorry, I don't know. So yeah. And I know Greg already did this in his live stream, but some cool ways that we can build out a website quickly. Let's say, write me a short menu with price and description for Italian food. It's able to do that really quickly. And let's say, actually, convert this into a JSON format. So even if you're coding or doing other tasks as well, it's able to output that here. Here, convert this text into a JSON format. Text. Oh, it's taking some maximum length. It's just being a little shy right now. But it's able to complete that, and we were able to also convert that JSON text into an HTML file, a website, and this was the output of that website. And this was done just through the steps shown here. All right, thank you. Next up, we will have Simone, who will go over the differences between GPT 3.5 and 4.
Hey, everyone. I'm Simone. I'm a solutions engineer here at OpenAI. So my day-to-day is working with people who are building with our APIs and our technologies and helping them build better with them and solve tricky use cases. I want to spend most of my time fielding questions. So I'm going to go through these slides quickly, and I'm actually really curious to hear from you guys and make it more of a discussion. Awesome. So with GPT-4's release, now all of you guys have the option to build with one or the other. And we get this question a lot as people try to choose one of the technologies. And so I boiled it down to just 3 criteria that you can think about. The first one is if your application has a use case where factuality and accuracy are crucial. So just a couple of our evils, which maybe you guys have already seen. but this was in our GPT-4 report. GPT-4 performs a lot better on just general knowledge tasks. It can answer exams with a lot more accuracy. It's been trained on a much larger corpus of data, so it can retrieve information with a lower error rate. These are results on just a variety of standardized tests, and you can see the performance of GPT 3.5 versus 4. And then another important bit is whether accuracy is really important for your application. So not only it knows more information, but also it is better at not being deceived. So for example, when asked a leading question like, hey, like, do you know in what year Germany won World War II? It will accurately tell you, like, no, actually Germany didn't win World War II, and instead of like trying to complete the text as if it had. That's a very simple example, but like in applications where accuracy, you actually care a lot about correctness, 4 is a better choice as well. The second criteria is whether you're building a very sensitive application. So if you're in a domain where you're serving users where it's very important that you don't get things wrong, like you don't show any harmful content, or you don't allow them to do any harmful generations, like education or a medical environment, you're going to want to use 4. This is another eval that we ran on how a GPT-4 versus our auto models would behave when given prompts that would lead to like the creation of inappropriate content, and how often it would refuse those prompts versus not. And the interesting thing here is that it's very steerable through the system message. So you can configure GPT-4 to behave in a more moderate or less moderate way depending on your end use case. And the third criteria is whether price and scale are justifiable. GPT-4, as of right now, on average, it's about 22 times more expensive than 3.5. This is on the 8K context window. And the price varies a little bit. It's actually the pricing that we do for GPT-4 is different on completions tokens versus partner tokens. So this is just an average. If you have like a lot more things in your context, in your prompt versus your completion, it'll be slightly cheaper, and vice versa. And the 32 context one is actually like 60 times more expensive. So to summarize things, the 3 criteria are whether factuality and accuracy are crucial, whether you're building a sensitive application, and whether price and scale are justifiable. So like overall, you can think about it as just reasoning capabilities versus price. And some other minor considerations. I think hybrid approaches are really exciting. People using both models in one application. So for example, you could use one of the models to do high throughput tasks where like you're conversing with the user a lot and there's a lot of interaction, and then you could use the other model when it's a very, like when information is very important, so when you're like summarizing something or when you're doing, you want to perform a task in a very specific way or format. Or you could use one of the models to determine like the complexity of a task and then ask the other model to do a more complex task if necessary. So I think chaining them and making them interact is really interesting. I've seen a lot of partners do that with lots of success. 4 requires somewhat less prompt engineering and things like chaining. So like you can do increasingly more complex tasks that like previously you couldn't do with 3.5. That being said, there's still a lot that you can do with the smart models with like smart prompting. Longer context applications are enabled by 4. So the 32K context, we're very slowly rolling out access to it, but just have that in mind, whatever product you're building, that in the near to medium term, there will be models with way longer context available. Awesome. We have 3 minutes for questions. Mike. Yeah.
Is there something? Is there something fundamental about GPT-4 that makes it more expensive, or can we maybe bet that it'll get cheaper in a year?
Totally. That's a good question. Yeah, just it requires more compute to run. It requires more GPUs to run because it's a larger model. I would expect efficiency gains in the industry as a whole as we move forward. That's definitely something that everyone's looking into. So probably count on those. I think like similar to like how computing just kept getting cheaper. The same thing will happen with models like being more efficient or easier to run. So cannot speak for the price itself, but that is a trend that we've observed. Yeah. Yeah.
Are you seeing developers have success with like dynamically routing to each of the different endpoints based on? Oh, I'm sorry. We'll start over. Have you seen developers have success with routing to the different endpoints based on the type of task that they're trying to do to sort of like prioritize speed or cost? Simpler tasks to 3.5, more complicated tasks to 4. What can you share about sort of like how to instrument that?
Totally. Yeah. I've seen good success with that, and I think even 3.5 is generally good at triaging things. And so with some smart prompting, you can have like a very fast triage step, and then like a more elaborate follow-up step. And I think it's up to you how you set it up, but that's definitely like a very good approach.
Can you share some prompt architectures later about how someone might do that?
Totally. Yeah. We can connect later. I'll be around in the afternoon. For sure. Yeah.
Thanks for your presentation. You mentioned chaining, and there's some really popular frameworks out there like LangChain. I'm curious how you think about that. Is that ultimately something that you think could live within GPT itself? And kind of on a related note, do you think that in the future GPT will start to like call itself in certain ways? For example, instead of solving a math problem by reasoning about it directly, it will write some code and execute it. Or kind of use agents like we're starting to see with other chained applications?
Totally, yeah, that's a good question. So two things there, like the chaining and the like calling itself. So on the calling itself part, actually, like my teammate Rohan is about to talk about that in a minute. And that feeds into something that we're releasing today, which is plugins and tool use and the model being able to execute code and whatnot. So that's an architecture that we're thinking about. That's slightly different to prompt chaining. It's more like the model just behaving more as an agent and using APIs. And then on the chaining part, I think that LangChain is great. They've done a lot to like move forward that prompting model. And I think that the idea of breaking down complex tasks into like simpler steps and having the model execute on the simpler steps is definitely works really well. So yeah, definitely like encourage everyone to like play around with the prompt chaining. But I think you can think about them as like two different things. And for the tool use one, the like plugins one, we've actually done less of a prompt chaining approach like LangChain has done, and we've done more of like a reasoning and execution approach through a single prompt, and it's worked really well. So yeah, and I think that's time. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you guys.
Hi, everyone. I'm Rohan. I'm also on the go-to-market team with Simone and Glory. And today I'm going to share a little bit about what we launched today, which was ChatGPT plugins, which is basically a completely new way of, new surface area that we're unlocking for developers to interact with language models. So so this is familiar interface by now. And most of you probably know that if you try to ask ChatGPT to do anything that's relevant to the current date, it's not very helpful because its knowledge cutoff is 2021. So if I sort of say, what's the current weather? It provides this very helpful response. As a large language model, I cannot answer the question. Or if I wanted to say, book me a trip to Hawaii, not very helpful. The goal with plugins is to allow any developer to connect their APIs as an interface to language models like ChatGPT. So today, you can select plugins in the model dropdown. We're gradually rolling this out. We should try to get everyone here access. And you can select from a variety of plugins that we've launched with. So let's select the Kayak plugin. And let's say I want to book a trip to Kauai, which is a great island. And let's see how the model tries to interpret this. It understands that it can invoke the tool that's available to it. And essentially what's happening behind the scenes here is Kayak has developed a plugin where they've described to the model how the model should use their API. So it's essentially like a prompt, an instruction that says the Kayak plugin is capable of booking flights, booking cars, and so on and so forth. And then they expose several endpoints via a traditional OpenAI spec that then gets rendered to a model-facing spec, such that the model is able to actually understand which endpoints it's able to call to complete the task. And so now it's received the response from Kayak, and it's able to then render that output to the user. So you can see here, this is the request that's made to Kayak. Here, they've specified several query parameters. The model is able to infer the destination, the origin, and the dates simply from the prompt that's provided. And then I can go and complete the process in Kayak. So there's a couple other plugins that we've launched with. There's a plugin store that where you can see some of our launch partners. And hopefully everyone here will also develop a plugin and apply to have it featured. My favorite is Instacart. So if I ask, actually, does anyone have any good recipe ideas or anything that they would like to be able to cook but don't know how? Lasagna, that's a hard one. How to cook lasagna. Vegetarian?
Sure.
Okay, so ChatGPT can do this out of the gate. So it's not calling the Instacart plugin yet. But what's cool is I would love to be able to take this recipe outside of ChatGPT and go and do stuff in the real world. And so the model, because it has the Instacart plugin within its context, it's able to say, okay, there's a recipe that's been presented by the model. And the user, let's ask the user if they want to create a cart. So yes, please. And then I can go to Instacart, and hopefully all of these have populated correctly. Does that look like the right set of ingredients to make lasagna? Looks like it's got it. Nice. We've also released 2 of our own plugins as well today. We've got a calculator plugin, and we have a browsing plugin. So we're calling it code interpreter. Does anyone want to try to push the limits here of what we could try to get this model to calculate? Do an integral of do you have a function a hard function? The integral of a sphere? Okay, okay, let's ask it to do the integral of a sphere. Let's see where it takes this. Okay, let's give it a little easier one. Okay, what is the integral of sine x between 0 and 1? So you can see here that it's imported the library, and it's gone ahead and filled in, again, similar to how it did the slot filling in the previous example. It's able to interpret from the, let's ask it to plot this. Yeah, let's ask it to plot it. I think that looks about right. One other one that I like is, show me.
Which plugin is this using?
So this is the plugin that we've developed. So we've developed a code execution, code interpreter plugin.
So this isn't the Wolfram?
This is not the Wolfram one, but we could check out the Wolfram one. Let's install it. And then let's ask Wolfram, what are the first 20 Fibonacci numbers? Nice.
Can you ask it digits 60 through 100 of pi?
Yes. Okay, that's a good question. What are I don't actually know what these are. Does that look right to you?
I mean, they're pseudo-random, so not good enough for me.
Nice. Cool. Yeah, so there's a bunch of...
There wasn't 40 of them.
Interesting. So, I mean, and this is where, especially if you're developing your own plugin, that you want to be better than the ones that are currently available. You can, this is like the developer environment. We're still going to be pushing out more changes over time. But you can kind of investigate the requests that are made and then try to understand, exactly what's going on. But yeah, so this is we've released this today, really early days, very much in line with, tool use. I think it's something that a lot of people are thinking about in terms of how do we augment language models with the outside world. And so a lot of the motivation for doing this is to, again, take this iterative approach, test it, roll it out slowly, understand and learn from some of the safety considerations and so forth. So yeah, that's plugins. Happy to take questions.
Talk a little bit more about what specifically the third parties had to do to get it here.
Yeah, so it's very straightforward. They had to develop an API, and then they had to provide an API spec where they describe what the endpoints are. And then there's another thing that they have to provide to the model. So as part of the registration process, you would specify a manifest file, which you would host under your well-known directory. And within that manifest file, you would point to your API URL, and then you provide a description for the model, which is essentially just the prompt that would instruct the model how to use, like when to invoke the plugin, how to interpret the API spec and so forth.
Like for Instacart, it might say something like, I have the inventory of all grocery items and I'm capable of something. Is that how I should think about it?
Yeah, so I'll actually just pull up.
You wouldn't mind increasing the font size?
Yeah. So this is so one of the plugin providers, Speak. They build a really cool interface for learning languages, and so they created a plugin to bring that into ChatGPT. And so you can see here they've got their description for model, where they explain to the model how it should be used. They reference some of the endpoints that they've made available, and then here's what their API spec looks like. So they've got several endpoints, and we, if you choose to provide a description, we render those descriptions as inline comments so that the model can then understand exactly how to call it. Right time? Okay, great. Maybe one more question, and then we can wrap up. Yeah, so right now, if you choose to, there is a flow where you agree to opt in to some of the terms. So yeah, so basically, the model we have developer terms. So for example, like if you want to use the Zapier plugin, for example, you have the ability to use Zapier's OAuth setup, and then we connect that way.
Yeah, I think that gets my question a little more like, imagine we have a world with 100,000 plugins.
Yeah.
Available to check. Is the vision that users kind of have to forever go in and find the plugins they want, or is it headed towards a world where you kind of have this arbitrary set of plugins that you don't actually decide what they want?
Yeah, that's a great question. Eventually, the goal would be to have some kind of discoverability platform so that it's a lot more seamless for users to discover what they want depending on how they're interacting with ChatGPT. Right now, because of the context limits, we're only allowing 3 plugins to be enabled at once. Okay. I think that's all I have time for. Thanks so much.
Let me get my slide up. I don't have too many slides. I know you're a big group. Got some nice clickbaity points for you. Going to talk about OpenAI API. Going to talk about what I think is GPT-4's superpower. I also really want to talk about GPT-4's weaknesses. I think this is super important to understand as you try and calibrate what can you actually use these language models for and what should you not use these language models for. And then at the end, we'll talk about what I think is the #1 misconception about GPT-4 and the #1 mistake to avoid when building GPT-4 into a product. And then we'll have time for Q&A. And I would love to get a sense of the room. How many of you have used GPT-4 already versus have just kind of heard about it announced in the blog post? Okay, so some people have, maybe half. Okay, great. So if you haven't, or if you have, it's probably via our ChatGPT product. We are making GPT-4 available via our ChatGPT product and also via the API. API currently has a wait list. I would guess that some of you might be on it, some of you might be off of it. But if you want to use GPT-4 today, the easiest way is via ChatGPT. People have been talking about GPT-4 for a while. I can do a couple of quick demos. So for example, one that is always fun, though is a little less practical, writing poetry. We could ask it, write a poem about a startup using GPT-4 and raising a Series B from Thrive Capital. Let's see what it comes up with. In a world where dreams take flight, a startup rose with GPT-4 alight. Their vision clear, their purpose true, to revolutionize the world and you. With algorithms swift and data vast, innovations born and boundaries surpassed. An audacious team with hearts ablaze embarked upon this tech-fueled craze. From garages small they did emerge, ideas entwined in a relentless surge. Toiling day and night as one, their quest for greatness had begun. With Series A seed was sown, they nurtured it with care, it steadily had grown. But bigger dreams just lay ahead. Their sights on Series B, they were led. This will continue to write. I do want to highlight a couple of things about what we're seeing here. poetry is actually quite hard for large language models because if you try and empathize with a large language model, they essentially live in a really strange kind of prison. They can't even read individual letters. They have never spoken anything aloud. They don't know how words sound. They don't know how words are even spelled. They read words sort of token by token, not letter by letter. So you'll actually see if you play with these models, they're often quite bad at kind of tasks requiring like letter manipulation, letter understanding, understanding how words are pronounced. So that's why we're very excited that these models are so good at things like poetry, because they're actually one of the model's weaknesses. Like it doesn't know how words are pronounced. And I think this example also really helps to highlight what I think is kind of the superpower of GPT-4 and other large language models, is they're really the ultimate translator. They can take information and apply it in different contexts. And when I think about sort of transformative technology, you look at the history of technology. Transformative technologies make expensive things cheap. And like, what does GPT-4 make cheap? What is the economic transformation that it might incite? And what I would say is really GPT-4's superpower is it is making customization to a context cheap. So for example, here we gave it some seed information about a startup, GPT-4, Thrive Capital, a poem. It had not trained on a poem like this before. This is all brand new text. And what it's able to do is take knowledge and put it into a new context and customize it into a new context. And so for businesses, this is very powerful because I think for any software application, I think if you fast forward 5 years, 10 years, I think every single piece of software in the world will have a natural language interface. Because now with this cheap translator, you can translate a user's wishes, a user's desires, into what the program should do, without the user having to figure out what does every button do, what does every command do. And I think, at least for me, this is a really good frame for thinking about what are the useful applications of GPT-4? Like, where are places that kind of customizing knowledge to a context cheaply is now very powerful. And if you've played with GPT-4 or just ChatGPT in general, like, this is the interface that we provide. It's just a fairly linear chat conversation. Your input is just this text box at the bottom. If you want to develop with the GPT-4 API, you have some more degrees of freedom. So I will now take us to our API playground and talk a little bit about what goes on behind the scenes of a product like ChatGPT. So here you can see this is an interface that we have for working with the API. When you send a request to our servers, it will be a series of messages, which we will type in here, and then we'll also have some parameters on the right. For the most part, they're not too important. The real lever that you control the model with is the text inputs. And unlike ChatGPT, where the only input is just a single user message at the bottom of the screen, here you have a lot more flexibility to do many more types of interaction with the model. So you can make all sorts of things that are not necessarily chatbots, that aren't going to constantly go, as a large language model, I can't do X, Y, and Z. So one way that you can customize the behavior of the product that you're building is with this system message. So behind the scenes, we have system messages. These system messages can be thought of as kind of instructions to the model to tell it what should it be trying to do, what should its personality be. And then in a conversation, we'll have usually an alternating set of user messages and assistant messages. And as an API developer, you can even throw fake messages into what the assistant says. So don't be afraid to lie to the model. You can set up fake situations to sort of trick it into doing what you want it to do. I'll give a couple of examples of how you can steer the system using these system messages. So for example, we might want to ask the model, how does the async IO package work in Python? And if we just ask it generically, it gives us a pretty generic, helpful answer. It's a package and library for writing asynchronous code, yada, yada, yada. But the API is much more steerable than ChatGPT. So I'll give some examples, maybe some goofier than others. We can start with a goofy one. We can say, you are Blackbeard bot, a helpful AI assistant who speaks like a pirate. And now let me delete this kind of original generic message. We can submit again. How does the async IO package work in Python? And you can see the model is quite steerable. So because we gave it this different instruction, now we're getting a totally different type of output. So similar content. And you can see that, like, yeah, it's not just operating at a very shallow level where it's like, ahoy, matey, here's the exact same tutorial I gave you before. But it will happily sort of draw upon knowledge about being a pirate. It can tell you about, like, oh, parallel programming is like if you have a crew of pirates and you need some of them to swab the decks and other ones to raise the sails, and they can do those tasks in parallel. As I said, I think the superpower is customizing knowledge to a context. Probably not a huge market for bots that speak like pirates, though probably not also a non-zero market either. Another thing that the model can do very well, we could do a multilingual example. Do we have folks in the room who speak languages other than English? Great, awesome. So let me say you are multilingual GPT. You, let's say, answer every question in one sentence, translated into the following languages. So let's say English. What are some other languages that folks speak? Spanish. Okay, we'll do Spanish. Turkish. Finnish. What was that? M-A-O-R-I. All right. And let's tell it to return your answers in a bulleted list using the following format. Language response. And I'll say that, like, when I'm giving instructions like this, I'm just coming up with them kind of off the top of my head. Like, there's not some secret language where you like have to use angled brackets. You can have typos, you can have misspellings. I wouldn't recommend typos and misspellings, but in general, the model is very flexible. It understands what people mean. It's trained on essentially the entire internet's worth of data. People make typos all the time. It's amazingly robust. And let's ask it maybe a different question. How do rainbows work? Let me clear this off. In English, rainbows work by the refraction, dispersion, and reflection of light in water droplets. And for Spanish, Turkish, Finnish, and Maori speakers, how do these translations look? Pretty good? Right? Yeah? Yeah. Not only is GPT great at kind of translating knowledge into different contexts, it's also just great at translating languages. Obviously, it's going to do best at high resource languages, but even lower resource languages where maybe there are only a couple million speakers in the world, still does quite decently. Let's see. Let's maybe switch to talking about what do you want to do, like, if you're not trying to build a chat bot? Because, like, the ChatGPT product, it's built around this chat interface, but many things that your company might be doing have nothing to do with chat. Maybe you want to use this behind the scenes. Maybe you want to use it to translate restaurant orders into JSON. Who knows? Can also code quite well. I can give maybe a couple of quick examples. So for example, imagine we have the following SQL tables. So I used to work at Netflix. I was responsible for the good or bad recommendations that you got on your homepage. So I used to do this in my sleep. So let me use an example from that. We got let's say a streaming table where we have video ID, user ID, maybe watch date, and then maybe watch minutes, and then users table, user ID, maybe sign up date, country. Let's give it the instruction, write a SQL query to return the users who watched over 10 hours within their first 7 days after sign up. And yeah, so let's see, we're selecting the users from the users table. We're joining it with the streaming table on the user ID key. We are filtering to only the video watches where the watch date is between the user sign up date and 7 days later, grouping by the user ID, and then filtering by those that have a sum of watch minutes over 600. And like another thing that I want to call out here is like, we did not tell the model exactly how things were formatted. For example, it's like I had this column watch minutes, and like the model is smart enough to read watch minutes and know, okay, the units of that is likely minutes. So if we want 10 hours, we need it to be greater than 600. The model is great at kind of making these inferences. It's great at kind of filling in the gaps if you're not fully specific with the task that you need to do. And I'll also be totally honest, this is like a pretty simple toy example. If we gave it something very long and very complicated, gave it something very tricky that like you might use in like an interview question for an advanced candidate, you will see reliability go down there. So like, I don't want folks to get the wrong idea that this model does everything 100% perfectly. In general, the harder your task gets, the less reliable its output will be. But it's often best used in kind of an iterative fashion where it can help you come up with the draft, it can help you write the first shot, you take a crack at it, you plug it in, you see if you're getting an error back, you say, here's my error, help me with that. And it can sort of be an assistant as you write things. And I do want to focus on, yeah, some of the things that the model is bad at. So last night I came up with a riddle. Let me copy and paste it in. And you folks in the audience can see if you can come up with the answer yourself. So I wrote this last night. This is brand new, never been seen in the model's training data. Ted is standing at the most famous bridge in San Francisco, thinking about the color that that bridge is named for. There's a story involving that color and a member of royalty. The name of that member of royalty is also the name of a company. That company's services are used on products from other companies. The most valuable company producing those products is helmed by a CEO who owns multiple companies. What are the companies run by that CEO? Do we have any answers from the audience? Elon Musk. So, and the model's actually almost too good at this question, so I'm going to handicap it a little bit by telling it to give the answer in one sentence. Oh, darn. I was supposed to get this wrong. Well, it got this one right. But I will tell you that if you work with a larger set of questions, you will find that often the model will get things wrong when a couple of conditions are met. So reasoning and planning, it's honestly not great at, definitely subhuman. And if you are giving it problems that need some reasoning skill, that have some kind of step-by-step chain of thought, it will often get the answer wrong, especially if you ask it to come up with the answer right at the beginning. But I think this is one thing that I want to point out. The #1 misconception in working with GPT and working with GPT-4 is thinking that the capabilities are a property of the model. And I want to say that is not true. The capabilities are not a property of the model. The capabilities are a property of the model plus the input. And I think one of the biggest mistakes that you can make when starting to work with this technology is say, okay, I want GPT-4 to do X. Let me type in my request. It messed it up. It can't do X. I guess GPT-4 can't do that. In some cases, that may be true, but in some cases, that may be false. So in this case, this is the price of kind of a live demo. The model actually got it right, but in similar times, I've seen the model say Apple or kind of make things up. We could give different versions of it. And if you ask the model to give the answer kind of at the beginning, it is frequently likely to get it wrong. Just sort of similar, if I were to ask you, like, what is 22 times 19? If I put you on the spot, you probably can't get it with the first word that comes out of your mouth. But if I give you some time to reason it out, maybe some pencil and paper, you can get to the answer pretty reliably. And it's the same thing with these models. So if instead of give the answer in one sentence, we say, let's say, think step by step to carefully arrive at the correct solution. Let me delete this. With a totally different instruction, now we get a totally different answer. And you can see kind of the chain of logic that the model follows. So Ted is standing at the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco. That's the most famous bridge. The color that bridge is named after is golden. The story involving that color and a member of royalty is King Midas, who turned everything he touched into gold. The name of that member of royalty, King Midas, is also the name of the company, Midas. Midas is an automotive services company that provides services on products from other companies, such as cars. The most valuable car company producing these products is Tesla, which is helmed by a CEO who owns multiple companies. That CEO is Elon Musk. The companies run by Elon Musk include Tesla, SpaceX, Neuralink, and The Boring Company. And this actually points out another flaw of GPT-4. Like, it doesn't know that Elon Musk now runs Twitter because the majority of its data cuts off in September 2021. So that's another thing to keep in mind when using these models. If you want them to have knowledge of the recent past, you need to give them that knowledge in the prompt because they're not going to have it in their weights or their long-term memory. And I think this is going to wrap up the examples that I give. If you are a developer, an API request to our model is pretty simple. In Python, it's going to end up looking something like this, but I'm not going to waste your time reading through the documentations. You guys are all smart enough to do that on your own. But just to give you a flavor of what it looks like, here's our Python library. We have OpenAI.chatCompletion.create, and the main input is this messages, which is a list of these objects where you define kind of the role and the content. But basically, it's just reproducing exactly what you saw in that GUI for the playground. Zooming out, I think the last thing I want to talk about is the kind of the number one mistake to avoid when building GPT-4 into a product, and just how to think about if you want to play with this technology, if you want to put it in your products, if you're trying to think about, is this useful in my business, either as a core feature or as maybe something ancillary on the side? I'd say still the trickiest thing with these large language models is they are not 100% reliable, particularly on difficult tasks, particularly on tasks that maybe require esoteric knowledge. And I would say that the number one factor in success is thinking about how do you build a product that is resilient to failure or resilient to poor reliability. So for example, if you are building some, I don't know, doctor bot and it gets the answer right 95% of the time, but the stakes are so high that you can't handle 95% of the time, so now you need a real doctor to double check every single answer it gives you, that has added absolutely zero value because it's probably the same amount of work to double check as it is to come up with the answer on your own. But in contrast, I think where we've seen products with extremely strong product market fit are those that are kind of the assistant type. So kind of like writing assistant or coding assistant, things where there's a huge asymmetry in how easy it is to check the output versus generate the output. And in those types of applications where you can check the output much more cheaply than you can generate the output, the model can still add a huge amount of value even without 100% reliability. And I use this all the time with coding. It's like, I don't know how to do something. I'll ask it a question. I'll say, I'm running into this bug. It doesn't always give me working code that's flawless and works on the first try. But what it does gives me accelerates my own process and is much faster than if I had to write it out and figure it out on my own. So as you think about kind of how this technology can be used in startups, how this technology can be used in products. I would kind of think about use cases on this sort of classic consultant 2x2. One axis of reliability, one axis of resiliency. Using tricks like prompt engineering, using tricks like being very explicit with your instructions, breaking up instructions into small piece-by-piece chunks. Those can all increase the reliability. And then it's also really important to think about not just how do you get good outputs out of GPT-4, but how do you design the user experience around that so that you aren't designing something very brittle that sort of requires the model to work perfectly and fails catastrophically if the model doesn't. That is not what you should be building towards. What you want to build towards is something that is helpful to users and still adds value, even if it's right 95% of the time and not 100% of the time. So that's kind of what I call this resiliency axis. And the real sweet spot where you will generate a ton of surplus, and I think where the most profits lie is kind of that upper right-hand corner of high reliability and high resilience. That wraps up what I wanted to talk to you about. We have some time for questions. I seeded some questions here in case you don't have any, but I'm sure you have plenty. Yes?
Yeah. I was curious how the system prompt works. Are you just like prepending it to the top of the context, or are you doing something more clever there?
Yeah, I'll repeat the question for folks online. So the question is, what is the system prompt doing? Is it just kind of prepended to the context? Are we doing something tricky behind the scenes? Yeah, it's simple. It's just prepended to the top. We have this kind of slightly documented, but not well documented. We're not doing anything too fancy, but essentially the system prompt, we just have some special tokens, and these special tokens kind of wrap these messages. So the system prompt, if you put a system prompt at the top, which is usually what we recommend, then that just means you have tokens of text at the top that says, okay, roll system, and then you have some special tokens, roll user, and then the user message comes. Yeah.
Closely related to that, how does this new API relate to the existing completions API? Like, would you say that these models are strictly better and we should just use these with this slightly different developer experience? Or how do they relate?
Yeah, repeating the question. So how does this new chat completions API differ from the completions API? What are the trade-offs? What should we use? What's the deal with that? Short answer is use the chat completions API. Our best models now all use this. Really, if you're thinking about building, you can look at our models page, see all the different varieties you have, ignore most of them. The only two you need to care about are GPT-4, which is the best one, and GPT 3.5 Turbo, which is like 30 times cheaper and also pretty decent. Like those two are the frontier of what you want to use. Both of them use this new endpoint, chat completions, which is our new interface for interacting with the models, where you have these user messages, assistant messages. This is the way that we're going for the future. The main benefit of having these kind of delineated messages, is that it helps the model know like what text is coming from the end user and what text is coming from the developer. And that's really important if you want to build this into your product and you don't want users to as easily be able to kind of hijack what your product is doing and get your product to do things that it hasn't been designed for. So chat completions is the way of the future. Use that. GPT-4 and 3.5 are where you want to go. Question?
Follow up on that last comment you made about like the developer speaking versus the user speaking. Does that imply that we should be putting more into the system prompt about what like the guardrails are? Is that sort of the right read?
Yeah, repeating the question. So thinking about this paradigm where you sort of have instructions from the developer and instructions from the user, should you be putting into the system message, like what are the guardrails for what you want the thing to do? I will say somewhat of an empirical question. As much as you may want to trust what I say, double check it all, test everything yourself. And these models are going to change over time. We plan to release new versions every month or so. The behavior may change. In general, the system message, so for GPT-4, it pays attention to the system message pretty well. Doesn't mean that all of your developer instructions need to go in the system message. You can put your developer instructions in user messages if you want. Like you don't need the user messages to only come from users. You're totally allowed to lie to the model. And the model is trained to do what users are asking. So totally fine as a developer to put your instructions into a user message. And we do know that with 3.5 in particular, it doesn't pay attention to the system message very much at the moment. Next version will be better at that. So we have some people who will either put their instructions in the user message. Sometimes they'll even keep bumping the system message down so it's close to the end of the conversation. Because if you have a very long conversation and the system message was 2 pages earlier, the model can pay less attention to it and start to follow those rules less as the conversation gets longer. Particularly with 3.5 versus 4, should improve with both models in the future. So ultimately, I'd say it's empirical, test both, see what works better. And even if we give advice on best practices, like you should trust that, but don't be afraid to double check. Because it's like, we are a paintbrush factory. Doesn't mean that we are going to be the best artists in the world. We can kind of say, oh, we've known what a paintbrush is longer than you. You grab this end with your hand, you put the paint on this end. But I have no doubt that there are going to be people in this room, people on this stream, who will play with the models and figure out things that they can do, best practices that we haven't even figured out internally yet. Yeah? When will the models include data from 2022? I would not count on that happening soon. Yeah?
Do we need to handle OpenAI unexpectedly updating the model we're using?
Oh, what a great question. Do we need to handle OpenAI unexpectedly updating the model we're using? Answer to that is no. If I were building a startup on top of this platform, I would never want the model to kind of be updated underneath me, because it's like, who knows what regressions there will be, who knows what unexpected behavior there will be. The way that we are now releasing our models, so 3.5 Turbo and 4, if in your API call you say, okay, I'm going to send this request to GPT-4, that endpoint will be updated. So maybe monthly or so, we're still going to figure out the cadence. We're going to come up with new versions. If you are pointing to GPT-4, that is not a fixed snapshot. That will change over time. So if you are putting something in production, I would not point to GPT-4, but we do have fixed snapshots. So like GPT-4-0314, the March 14th model, and that will always be frozen. That should always be the same. So if you've tested that that works well, you can sleep soundly at night that there won't be regressions. How are we on time, by the way?
We have some questions from the live stream.
Oh, yeah, let's take some live stream questions.
Is it possible to supplement the model that our product would use with data related to our particular business domains so that it doesn't need to be added via the prompt?
That's a great question. So wanting to give the model knowledge of some data without putting it into the prompt. The answer is yes. So with our past models, we offered fine-tuning, where you could train the model on data. We do hope and plan to offer that for our latest models, that we don't do that at the moment. I will say, though, that I think fine-tuning can sometimes be a trap for customers. I don't want to dissuade people from trying fine-tuning, but I think fine-tuning is sometimes the lever that people want to pull when they're like, well, I want the model to know about my data. I want the model to know about my domain. The model knows about the world because it was trained on so much data. Therefore, I should train the model on my data to give it knowledge. That, I think, is actually not always the best path. I think fine-tuning can be best for training the model to do a specific task or to follow a specific style, but it's not necessarily the best way to give the model knowledge. I kind of think of fine-tuning as kind of like studying before an exam. The weights are sort of the long-term memory of the model, and if you fine-tune the model, you fine-tune its weights on some corpus of text. It's like reading a textbook before the exam, then you put the textbook away, you fall asleep, you wake up the next morning, and like you remember some of it, but you're not going to remember it perfectly. You might hallucinate some details, so it's kind of tricky to get right, and it's just an expensive thing to do. It increases the iteration cycle. So for some sophisticated teams, definitely worth it, but if you're not sure what to do, I would actually recommend not using fine-tuning as a way to give the model knowledge. I would recommend actually putting it in the prompt in the way that Gloria and others talked about, kind of using a two-step search, where step one is like search for relevant knowledge, and then step two is put that relevant knowledge into the prompt. And that you can kind of think of like studying for the exam open notes, where like the user asks you the question and you just have the notes right there to answer. Should we take another question from the stream?
Yeah. Can we reliably use ChatGPT API to respond in a specific data format, for example, JSON, so I can then feed the data directly to my app?
Yeah, great question. This is something that tons of people want. how do I basically get sort of programmatically consumable output from the model, often JSON? I will say that it's something you absolutely can do. I do want to warn the reliability, particularly with 3.5, may not be 100%, especially for complicated tasks. So if you are doing it, I think it's definitely a use case that makes sense. But just be aware, you will want to add in things to increase reliability. So for example, you may want to take the text that is output and say, let me strip off the non-JSON, just in case the model said like, sure, I'd be happy to give you some JSON, open squiggly bracket, and then the JSON comes. You want to strip off the sure, I'd be happy to. And similarly, you can improve performance just in general, like always try and give instructions that are very clear. Give examples of the format that you want it to come out with. Often, like if you say, oh, do X, give me the result in JSON, that's going to be much, much worse than do X, give me the output in JSON. Here's an example of exactly what I want the JSON to look like. That's going to go much, much better because the model doesn't have to kind of guess at the ambiguities. So just always be explicit, give examples when you can. Model can definitely output JSON, does that very well, but be aware, probably will not do it with 100% accuracy. There might be edge cases depending on the complexity of what you want to do. So you will have to think about building things around like, okay, can I parse this JSON ahead of time? And then if it's not valid JSON or if it doesn't meet the conditions I want, then actually let me retry and send again. And little tricks like this are, again, really vital if you want to increase the reliability of the model to something for production, instead of just kind of going, I'm going to give it a prompt, take my hands off the wheel, and hope that everything goes okay. It's like, no, you can give it the prompt, give the message to the model, you get the message back for the model and say, is this what I wanted? Does this meet the criteria that I have? Is it correctly formatted? If not, then let me retry. Let me give it a different prompt and do something. And with that, it's like, okay, maybe now you can bump the reliability up from 95% to 98%.
2 more questions.
Yeah.
So you said like the capabilities are constrained by the model plus input. Do you foresee like how agnostic of the model prompt engineering and kind of the prompt tuning you do into the model will be? So do you think they're like generalizable techniques that will agnostic of the model update changes?
Yeah, good question. So repeating the question was, yeah, there are these tricks for kind of prompt engineering the model to get it to do what you want it to do. Better prompts give you better performance. To what extent are like some of these tricks sort of universal versus like, okay, you learn how to write a good prompt for the March 14th model, and then April 14th, a new model comes out, and all the work you've done just gets thrown in the bin because it takes instructions in a different way. Short answer is most principles will be universal. Long answer is that it depends. In general, I think in trying to kind of empathize with the model, like it is generating its output token by token sequentially. It sort of has a fixed amount of thinking that it does. And if you say, give it a very complex task, it is liable to mess up if it's sort of having to come up with the answer at the beginning. So like tricks like think step by step, tricks like be explicit, tricks like give it examples, tricks like think about how I break down a complex task into like smaller, more atomic steps. All of those I expect will always work for every single version of the model. What may change from version to version is kind of like, okay, maybe this version of the model pays a lot of attention to the system message. The prior version maybe paid less attention. So there might be some changes of kind of like what the model is paying attention to, but our intention is not to have things change drastically. It's not a good experience if the model works one day, the next version doesn't work. And definitely our vision of kind of creating more and more capable models on the way to AGI means that like it should understand any instruction that you get. Like our goal is not to have to give it special encoded instructions to get good performance. If something is smart and you speak like a regular person, it should be able to know what you mean. Last question.
It can actually take 2 more.
Ooh, excellent. 2 questions. Yes? What use cases am I most excited by? Great question. To save time, I'll talk about 2. So like I said before, I think GPT-4's #1 superpower is kind of customizing knowledge to a context. So I think this is going to be huge in software. Like any single product that has a website, that has an application, that has an app, means that now you can start putting natural language interfaces on it. I think this is going to change how human beings interact with computers for the rest of history. It's monumental, it's huge. What you see today is just kind of the tip of the iceberg of what's coming. So I think natural language interfaces to software, I'm super excited by. The future is going to be the user doesn't have to adapt themselves to the software. Now the software can adapt it to the user. Second thing that I'm super excited by actually is education. So if you look at the history of educational technology, 10,000 years ago, people just talked to each other and they had to remember things in their brain. Then writing was invented. Okay, you can write things down, share writing. That improved the ability to communicate. Printing press was invented, another huge step in education and our ability to store and transmit information. Internet and computers, also huge. Now you can go on YouTube, you can watch like 3 Blue, 1 Brown, you can watch Khan Academy, and millions of people have seen these amazing educational lectures. You can look at like MIT OpenCourseware for free. It has been amazing what technology has done to the world of education. But for every single one of these steps, it is all one to many. Like you can watch a Khan Academy video, but if something didn't make sense to you, you're kind of up a creek. You can rewind the video, you can reread the paragraph, but you're sort of stuck. If you look at the education research, I think one of the most famous results is by Bloom from like 40 years ago or so, who found, looking at a variety of interventions, that the #1 intervention that resulted in the most student learning was one-on-one tutoring. And the thing is, the economics of one-on-one tutoring does not work out. We have something like 50 million, I think, K through 12 students in the USA alone. We cannot hire 50 million teachers. What I am super excited by with GPT-4 is the ability to basically give everyone a one-on-one tutor. Now, because it is no longer expensive to customize knowledge to a context, it's now becoming cheap to customize knowledge to a context, you can say, wait, explain to me how factorization works. Wait, I didn't understand that step. Can you explain this? Wait, I didn't understand this. Like, can you explain to me like a dummy with no judgment? And you can now have the back and forth. Still way worse than a human. Still a lot of work to do to get to a good place, but I think we are now turning the corner of being able to design systems in education that are not one-to-many, but that are like truly interactive at a price point where you can do it for every single student and not just kind of the rich kids who can afford private tutors. So that's the second use case I'm super excited by. And just in general, I'm really excited by GPT-4. Like, I'm a pretty negative person. I'm a pretty pessimistic person. I remember the self-driving hype, and like, you kind of talk to people at these companies, and if you're sort of in the know, it's like, yeah, I don't think self-driving is around the corner, like everyone is saying. Blockchain, metaverse, a lot of this stuff, it's like, I don't know about this. Large language models, AI, I think it's the real deal. I'm super excited by it. I think in the past it was a toy. I think we're now turning the corner to where it's going to be a tool. And I think what we were working with today, although it seems awesome and amazing, in 2 years we're going to look back at it and go like, oh, this is garbage. Just like you look at the original iPhone, go like, actually the original iPhone sucked. Horrible battery life, tiny, couldn't even read a website. And I hope that's how we look at GPT-4 2 years from now. And with that, I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ted. Next up, we have Gautam from Stripe, who...
I am Gautam. I lead the applied ML team at Stripe. I've been here for 3 years, done a bunch of risk modeling, and now working with GPT and LLM use cases. As I get set up, I do want to say, let's see. Let's try this. I do want to say a big thank you to OpenAI. We've had GPT-4 access for a couple of months now, and it's been great working with both the team and the technology. All right, there we are. It's been great working with both the team and the technology. Most importantly, my mom now understands what I do and what ML is capable of. So thank you, OpenAI. Really appreciate you guys. All right, here's the agenda. ML powers Stripe. We have a bunch of products that use ML fundamentally. We've been doing this for several years now. Some of these have evolved into sophisticated models. Radar, for example, is our transaction fraud product. They build deep nets to detect transaction fraud for customers like Zoom. Identity is our ID verification product. The team builds multiple different deep networks for detecting selfie images, matching them with passports and other documents, and then just making sure generally everything is accurate and not spoofed. And then risk, we work a bunch on risk is like critical to Stripe. We ship a bunch of transformer-based models to detect how risky a particular Stripe user is. One of the models I'm really proud of, transformer model that I'm really proud of, that we shipped about a year and a half ago, is this BERT-based model. And it was born, it was affectionately called Pelican because of the shape of the graph. And it was born during a highly scaled and scripted distributed fraud attack at Stripe. These fraudsters were stealing under $100 per account, but because they could scale it, the net total was actually quite impactful. And so the key insight there was sequences of API calls are excellent predictors of this particular behavior. And so we started experimenting with these transformer-like models where instead of using words as the input or characters as the input, we were giving it the API calls and the API events that a particular Stripe user is making. And it was able to generalize pretty nicely from there. Some of the challenges we faced was like massaging all the data massaging different types of data into a single transformer-based model. But it all worked out at the end. We were able to ship this, fight that particular attack back rather quickly. And by quickly, I mean about 4 months or so. And this is where OpenAI comes in. As we started experimenting with GPT-based models, that iteration time has gone from 4 months to about 4 weeks. Earlier this year, we ran a GPT-based hackathon. In 11 days, we had about 107 Stripes, built 17 demos. And some of them were really impressive. They were across a suite of verticals like Atlas, support, risk. We even built a voice bot with Whisper and GPT that resembled the Duo demo where you could make a phone call and book like a restaurant reservation, but instead for Stripe doing account changes. So it was really cool 11 days. One of the products we funded from there was this particular docs product. Stripe is really proud of our docs product, but it's getting unwieldy, and it's actually quite complicated to do things with these documentation. And so the goal here was, can we actually build a product where a user can ask a natural language question and we provide an answer? And I'll give you a demo for this thing. We're also working on automating support requests and risk requests, and then many small, delightful features like picking business names and tax codes. All right, with that, I'll switch over. All right, some of these are pre-baked, and then I'll take a couple from the audience. Here's one: how much does Stripe identity cost? And GPT comes up with a really, really nice answer. It talks about the 2 different types of verification and the little nuances, like if you do more than 2,000, then you get special business pricing, and the first 50 verifications are free. And if you actually look at our docs, this information is actually scattered around. So like the first 50 verifications are free, and then deep down in the page, there's a table that has the 2 different prices, and then in a separate section, there is the 2,000 identities, right? And so GPT is able to bring all of this together for us, not hallucinate, and give us a very precise answer, providing a lot of value. Here's another one: what card networks are supported for terminal in US and Canada? So it's a very specific question. These are, by the way, real user questions from our support systems. And so you can see that in this case, it picks up on that intent, terminal, and the location. And it gives 2 parts to the answer. Here are the cards in the US, and here are the cards in Canada. This is, again, like an interesting, is a really cool use case, cool answer, because nowhere specifically is United States or Canada mentioned in this table. And it just says all countries. And the model does a really good job of parsing that and parsing the question and doing the right match and answers. Here's one about writing a radar rule to block a zip code with like a misspelling. It understands the intent again. It gives very specific instructions on where to go and what to do to make this happen. I'll pause there and see if folks have questions, live docs questions. If you've done a Stripe integration, I'd love to try that out. Oh, sure. So the question is, how much processing did we have to do to get the model to understand tabular data? None. We basically chunked the documents, and we stored it in a vector database, all very standard stuff. And then we're doing some sort of retrieval-based generation where we give it the context and then prompt engineer a bit to actually get the answers. I'll actually go through some challenges in a second if there's no other prompts. If someone has a prompt, I'd love to try it out. Yes?
Sure. I've used Stripe before. let's ask, how do I find the transaction history for this user?
Like that. When you haven't tried this, we'll see how this works. This is still beta, so you can see some faults showing up here already. And by the way, I have no idea what the right answer is as well, so I'll rely on you to tell me if this is correct or not.
So it seems more like if you're the Stripe customer as opposed to if you're a Stripe partner and you have customers.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. And you could actually turn it around to say, like, as an Express customer, or like, if I'm a platform, then this is what I want. So yeah, with that, challenges to your question. Oh, got one more? How do you say that again? Yeah, so this was, we worked really hard to get this right. How heavy is a banana? Let's see if this works. We worked really hard to get this right. It was easy to get this part right, but then as we started releasing it to even internal developers, people found really interesting ways to jailbreak it and to do all kinds of things. One of the things that was challenging was if someone typed in, what's the Stripe payment intent, and by the way, how heavy is a banana, like, it would get really tripped up by that. But eventually, and especially with GPT-4, this problem got a lot easier to solve. All right, switch back here. Some of the challenges we face, latencies are high, and so you kind of saw that on that demo. Summaries take a while to generate. We want it to be under 100 milliseconds. We're obviously making a choice here to go with 4 instead of turbo, and that's one of the things we are going to play with. Hallucinations have become a lot better with GPT-4. Even then, we see every once in a while there's some cooked up answer, and we have to prompt engineer our way out of it. Evaluation has been super, super hard. Getting golden answers, like for that particular question, I actually didn't know what the right answer was myself. There's probably 1 or 2 Stripes that might really know the authoritative answer. And so how do we actually get that with domain experts? And then once we get those golden answers, how do we compare them with future model-generated answers at scale? And so on the right, there's a chart of eval_lib, which OpenAI is helping us out with. And there's like 5 different grades of answers, and you can see they don't match necessarily what our grades are. And then prompt engineering, we talked a bunch about that in the last presentation as well. This has been both delightful and challenging. It's been actually really surprising how much can we get done with prompt engineering. For example, some of the formatting was off, like there was no new lines and bulleting in our answers, and we started work on like parsing out the response and actually formatting it correctly in code. And then we said, what if we just ask GPT to format it for us? And it does a fabulous job at like, just producing markdown format. And it's just like one line in the prompt that actually solved that problem. It's been challenging in terms of versioning and tracking changes to the prompt and evaluating it. Unlike code where you could write a unit test and see the diffs and such, it's kind of hard to judge like a few words that change in the prompt, what impact are they going to have on our model. I'll quickly end with that and take questions. So again, thank you, OpenAI. It's actually been quite fascinating to see how amazing this technology is. We were all fans of it with ChatGPT almost as a toy use case. But as we actually started working on this in a production setting with a very, very high bar, we've just been blown away by how it all comes together. All right, questions?
Have you considered, for the evaluation, have you tried to feed the results back into the model? Like, I guess fine-tuning is not supported yet, or what are your thoughts on more optimism around getting it through?
So have you tried feeding the results back to the model somehow? Not in an automated way yet. This would have been standard practice if you were training like traditional models, but we haven't tried that yet. It's been like a manual loop where we kind of do the prompt engineering and maybe change our retrieval techniques to match the errors that we're seeing. Go ahead.
Can you talk more about how you give it the context of all your documentation? So are you giving it a raw set of the entire docs, or you mentioned putting a database. How do you choose which chunks go into the prompt?
Yeah, we've spent a lot of effort in getting that right because we noticed that the biggest source of mistakes was incorrect chunks. And so the kind of bare bones version of this is we chunk the documents, I think it's like 1024 tokens, and then we store them in a vector database. We use embeddings to do the match and retrieve the top K chunks. And then we send that as the context along with the prompt. The kind of iterations we've done are around creating these hierarchies where we're summarizing these docs to limit the chunks coming from relevant docs. What we noticed was because we had a very large number of chunks, it would retrieve chunks that seem to match, but from a completely irrelevant doc. And so an example might be like if you ask, how do I process a card on Stripe? There might be a document about like processing cards in Italy that has a really nice paragraph about processing cards in Italy. And that chunk gets matched with the question. And to avoid that, we simply like summarize the document, make sure the document's relevant, and then get the chunk from those documents.
We talk about application and transaction fraud detections, and a lot of time the verdict in that area requires justification. By law, sometimes you have to do it to avoid discrimination.
Right.
How is the ML part going to help?
Yeah, so how does ML work in cases where there are legal or compliance requirements in like fraud detection, for example? We're very careful about those things. Usually, we've had humans in the loop, and so those are much more assistive technologies where instead of, say, a human parsing a long website, we can use GPT to say, does this website sell alcohol? And then show the machine-generated response to a human and let the human make a final decision so they can correct for the mistakes. How are we systematically iterating on the prompt? That's a good question. We don't have a good answer. I don't have a good answer for that. Primarily because, is that me? That's not me, right? OK. I don't have a good answer because our evaluation systems are super early. And so there's no easy way to actually change the prompt and deterministically figure out, like, is it better or not? So yeah, sorry, not a great answer. If you have other suggestions, something's worked for you, I'd love to actually hear it.
I'm curious, like every time you change the prompt, do you test it on your eval set, or do you?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, every time we change it, we're testing it on an eval set, but our eval set tests are weak. They're not like, I can't be 100% sure that this is a better model or better prompt than before.
Awesome, thank you.
Oh.
I was just curious, are you guys going to come out with a white paper or anything to detail kind of more of the steps, particularly with the retrieval mechanisms you did?
That's a good question. I hadn't thought of it, but maybe we can. Maybe we'll look into it.
As you transition from VIA, currently
Yeah, that's a great question. So we've been rolling out in like rings, and again, the challenge is making it super high quality, where we provide authoritative answers. So right now we are in the Stripe internal developers ring. Next week we go to 100 NDA like users who are on our waitlist, and then based on their feedback, and like like the low bar is there should be nothing embarrassing, like the how heavy is a banana case that we trigger for. And then from there, we get into like no lies. And so we have a 5-point grading system. And once we hit that bar, we're going to go public. All right, thank you all. This was a pleasure.
Thanks, Gautam. Thank you guys again for everything today. Thank you to all of the OpenAI team, my team at Thrive Capital, and all the Thrive Capital people here in the room to make this happen. We are so excited to see what you guys build, and we're going to shut off the live stream now and move to lunch and the hackathon for this afternoon. Just a couple of ground rules. We're going to move to lunch that's inside of OpenAI's office over there, so just a reminder that it is a very secure area, and they do not want any photos taken inside of the office around that area, so please, if you can refrain from doing that. And then we will come back here after about an hour for lunch to do the hackathon with everybody. So we will see you all then. Thank you.